I know, right?
This is a different street.
You know? And it got second.
Look it up here.
So I said, well, I'll hear it come right next one.
Wait, dinner bell.
I got second again. I said, darn, I wasn't supposed to win. I'm supposed to be a street vibration volunteering right now, and I got to go to this contest.
What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. You wrote the word at the beginning. One with God the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. You didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the glory. Yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is. The name of
Thanks, guys. I think that's good. Have a seat, everyone. Who would have a testimony today of something God has been doing for you, something God is doing in you, or something He has been doing through you to make a difference in someone else's life or touch someone else in some way? Yes, Lee?
I want to thank everybody for the prayers that they gave my mother. Tomorrow is her 88th birthday.
Right.
And last year at this time, I thought I was going to lose her. And she is in excellent health now, and she's happy and content. And those are the things that, when you have positive thoughts for someone, it comes through.
Yeah. That's great. Is she in town? Is she in town?
She lives in Carson.
Okay. Anyone else? Something God's been doing for you, in you, or through you?
I want to carry on that. I want to thank everybody for praying for healing of my finger. It's almost back to normal.
Wow. Praise the Lord. Well, if anyone has anything come to your mind while we're going through our lesson today, you can just feel free to share it if something's triggered in you. Today we're going to look at a famous author.
Is that one of the books you need to read?
Hopefully everybody has a book in front of them. If you don't, you need one. And of course you can keep this, it's for you. I've written 6 books in my days, and this is one of them. I don't know what year, a couple years ago I think I wrote this one, on overcoming fear. And what this is the story of David and Goliath. It's actually 24 verses. 1 Samuel 17, 1 through 24, I believe, and that's what we're going to be looking at over the next 6-7 weeks. And I was trying to remember in my mind, have I already done this in church? My wife said, no, you haven't.
No, you haven't.
I haven't. Okay,
No,
good. I know I
but
can
you did it
trust
in
you.
Bible study.
Okay, she's been here from the beginning, so Sherry knows. My goal with this is that you will know this story in the Bible really, really well, and that you will be able to make application to your personal life as a result of learning this story. We're going to look at little bits and pieces of it, and each part, I think, will build up toward the crescendo, toward the actual way the story ends. And in each one of these weeks, we're going to be pulling out what I'm calling resiliency strategies. Strategies to bounce back, strategies to overcome, strategies for how to cope, skills, life skills to help us be able to not just survive but thrive. I'm calling those resiliency strategies in life. And today we're going to look at the first one. So we'll be referring to different parts of this today. My hope would have been last week you would have gotten these, but we had to order some more. Chapter 1 is what we're going to deal with today. But this week, if you have a chance to read for next week, read chapter 2 and 3 for next week, and it won't take long. They're only about 4 or 5 pages each, and they're big, bold print because that's what Lee told me to do. He said it would be easier to read. Actually, he didn't say that. I'm making that up. I did it for me because I'm over 50 now, and giant print is better. It's either giant print or at least 150, glasses, yeah. What are yours, Sandra? You look like you get some
These are 1.25.
1.2.
They're readers.
Yeah, that's what I have too, is the readers. I want us to start out by asking this question. Everyone is afraid is the title of this lesson today. Everyone is afraid. What does that mean? And I'm going to point this a little bit toward me because it's not going to get all of that. What does it mean when I say everyone is afraid? Tell me some things that people are afraid of.
The unknown.
The unknown.
Rejection.
Good.
Changes.
Change.
Failure.
Failure.
Death.
What?
Death.
Death.
Living. Some people are afraid of living.
Living. I think people are afraid of being honest because of the consequences that we might have to deal with if we are honest.
Trust.
Trust. People are afraid to trust.
Homelessness.
People are afraid that they'll lose their job and potentially be homeless, losing everything maybe. Yeah, fear of the future.
Finances.
Yeah.
Public speaking.
Hey, they say that's like the number one fear, right?
Yeah.
Public speaking, so you know that,
We have a club.
yeah, we have an answer for that. It's called Toastmasters. They say people fear public speaking more than death, which means you would rather be the dead person in the casket than the person giving the eulogy.
Being alone.
Fear being alone.
Loneliness, I guess.
Good. Fear of broken relationships, divorce.
Lack of money.
Yep, we'll include that with
Finance,
finances. Yep.
Good job.
Now, not all fear is bad. Some fear is very healthy, very good. We should have fear. Fear can be a motivator for us. And that's fear turned in the direction that it needs to turn us into motivation. We also have phobias. We have phobias. I have one. Anybody want to take a guess at what my phobia is?
Spiders.
Spider.
Nope. Good guess, though. Great minds think alike.
Snakes?
No.
The dark.
The dark. Who said
Afraid
that?
of the dark?
No, that's not it. It used to be though, Tegan. That's why I reacted like that.
Lights.
And I don't know, there's a term for it. There's a term for all of our
Elevators.
phobias. Any opportunity I have to walk downstairs, I will take it. I have an extreme phobia of elevators. I do not like them. They're evil. I don't know who created them.
Confinement.
I don't like the thought of them breaking down and being stuck on one
I don't either.
and not being able to get out. It's just I don't know why.
Oh,
It's a major phobia that I have.
Wow.
And when I get on an elevator, there's a battle going on in my emotions and my mind and my heart whenever I step on an elevator. It's crazy. I know some of you are thinking, well, just hit that fear head on, Donnie. Come on, you can overcome that fear. Maybe, but I could ask you the same thing about your phobia. Sometimes isn't that easy. So we have fears, then we have phobias, and there are all these fear of spiders, fear of, I don't know any of the technical terms, but they're out there. Lots of fears out there. I want to take this idea here into the idea of the folks fearing this person called Goliath, this giant in this story today. They had a major fear of this guy, and all of us have a Goliath or two in our lives. And that Goliath could be one of these things right here. That Goliath could be a person at work that gives you a bad time. Sometimes your Goliath could be your spouse or your ex-spouse. If it is your spouse, please do not do what David did to Goliath. Please do not eliminate the problem with the slicing off of the head. That's not defeating your Goliath the way that I want us to look at it. But we have these fears, and we all have a Goliath or two in our lives. I've dealt with this recently, and it came with another military person that I was afraid of their rank and power, and I was afraid that they were going to misuse that on me and use their rank in an abusive way, and I really had to deal with where is that fear coming from? How do I handle that? Why am I fearing this person like this? So there's all kinds of things about fear that we're going to look at. We're going to find out, what did David do that was different than every other Israelite when it came to standing up to Goliath and fighting him? Why could he do it and nobody else could? How could he attack the Goliath? Let's start off, and you have this in your outlines there. Fear causes us to be dismayed and terrified. We're talking about what fear does to us. Fear causes us to be dismayed and terrified. Danny, will you read that one for us?
Sure. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? I'm not a Philistine. And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified.
We're going to get into the graphics of this in a minute, but you have to picture this. This is Goliath. He stood almost 9 feet tall. His armor weighed almost 126 pounds. The tip of his spear was 15 pounds by itself. He was completely armored with nothing exposed on his body except just a small place on his face, his forehead and his face. He had an armor bearer that went before him. He was an intimidating creature. And he was a fighting man. He had been fighting all of his life. He was the champion of the Philistines. I feel like I should be one of those heavyweight commentators saying, in the left corner, we have Goliath from Gath. And this is the kind of impact he had on the Israelite community. The Israelites were dismayed and terrified at him. Which brings up my first question to us. Does what you fear cause you to be dismayed and terrified? Be terrified by the reality of that fear actually becoming real. Dismayed and terrified. Secondly, fear can cause us to run. Sherry, let's go ahead and read that one for us.
David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion of Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear.
So here we are again. First they were dismayed and terrified, and here's what happens. We're having to read between the lines here, and some of this is in the story. While Goliath was coming out every day for 40 days, and he was intimidating the Israelites and defying their God, one day David shows up. Welcome David to the scene. David the shepherd boy. This is David, the same one who committed adultery with Bathsheba. This is David, one of the greatest kings that Israel has ever known. This is David, the one who wrote Psalm 23 in the Bible. This is David who wrote the majority of the Psalms that we read. This is the shepherd boy. His job was to keep track of the sheep out in the field. But he had a special commission by his father, Jesse. Jesse said, David, I want you to go to the battle lines and I want you to check on your 3 oldest brothers. This is all in the story. He had 3 older brothers, and the father said, in addition to checking on them, I want you to come back and give me a report on how they're doing. I want you to take some things to King Saul, the leader of the Israelites. Take some bread, take some cheese, and take some grain. So here's David going to the battle lines, and while he's there and watching this whole scene take place, he sees Goliath, representing the Philistines on this side, step out and shout his usual defiance against the Israelites. And when David heard it, he watched the Israelites respond to Goliath's words, and he watched the Israelites run, tuck their tails and run in fear of Goliath. And David's looking around at this going, wait a second, I've got problems with this. I've got problems that this giant has such control over the Israelites. He just comes out and blabs his big mouth, shouts his usual defiance, and everybody gets afraid and tucks their tail and just runs. But then wait a second. As we make application into our lives, do we have enough courage to face our Goliath, or do we run? What about that addiction? What about that attitude? What about that fear? What about that past hurt? Is it easier to just have that rise up in our mind and heart, and instead of facing it, we just want to run from it? Which is what the Israelites did every day. And David, while he's delivering this food, says, wait a second, something's wrong with this picture. This is not the way. This giant should not be intimidating the Israelites, the people of God. This giant should not be saying the things he's saying about the God of Israel. Unacceptable. So this is what happens next. Or fear will have to be faced once and for all. David, while he's there, he goes to the Israelite king, which is King Saul at the time, and David said to Saul, and now imagine this, here's a shepherd boy, he's not even supposed to be at the battle lines. In fact, his oldest brother criticized him, Eliab. He said, David, what are you doing here? I know who you are, you just came here to watch the battle. I know how conceited you are, and I know that you have a wicked heart. Older brothers didn't like David because David already had been anointed to be the next king. And there was a lot of sibling rivalry between older brother Eliab and David. So the older brother says to him, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be back taking care of the sheep. Nobody invited you here. But there is David. So David is listening to these guys. He's watching them being intimidated every day. And I really find this interesting. While they're talking, the Israelites among themselves, somebody lets out the news and says, do you realize that Saul, whoever can defeat the Goliath, Saul will pay their taxes for their family. Saul will give his daughter in marriage, and they will be very wealthy. David, shepherd boy, overhears this. And he kind of shakes his head and he said, did I hear that right? He goes up and says, hey, tell me again, this is all in the story, 1 Samuel 17. David said, tell me again what will be done for the person who defeats Goliath. And they said, well, their taxes will be paid for their family. You'll get the king's daughter, King Saul's daughter, in marriage, and you'll be wealthy. And David said, you know what? I think not only, I'm in. I'm going to fight Goliath. I'll sign up. But it wasn't just, we'll talk about this next week, ulterior motives. David said, I'll sign up for two reasons. One, there's a nice little package if I should win. And number two, what Goliath is doing is unacceptable to the Israelites. So David says, I'll sign up. The king hears that David is interested, the only one interested in fighting Goliath. So King Saul calls him in and says, David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Now, do you find it a little amazing that not one of those Israelites stood up to Goliath? They got a whole Israelite camp and every one of them were afraid of the bully. Nobody would stand up to the bully. And here's a shepherd boy who wasn't even supposed to be there. He just happened to be bringing supplies and food. He's the one who raises his hand and says, I'll go fight the guy. What he's doing is unacceptable. And he volunteers. Your servant, talking about himself, I will go and fight him, David says to King Saul. Let's stop at this point and say this. The scripture says, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. I want to encourage you today that whatever your fear is, God's Spirit gives us power, love, and self-discipline. He does not give us the spirit of fear, but He gives us the spirit of power to overcome our fear. He gives us the spirit of love. Love casts out fear. And if God fills your heart with love, it will cast out any fear that's in your heart. Because perfect love casts out fear. For this is what God gives to us. So here's David, getting back to the story now. David says this to the King Saul of the Israelites, I will go and fight him. Here's what happens. Fear makes things worse than it actually is. And isn't this true? We get a little spot on our forehead or under our arm and we think, oh dear God, I've got melanoma cancer. Fear has us run things out to the worst possible scenario it could possibly be. Oh, this person got let go at work, so that means they're going to fire all of us and nobody's going to have a job. And fear tends to make things seem worse than they actually are. And it cripples us, it handicaps us, it keeps us where we are. And Crystal last week talked about the lies of Satan and believing those lies. And by the way, if you were here last week, didn't Crystal do a great job? So fear makes things seem worse than it actually is. Is that all there is? That's because we're going to read some out of this. Open up your books with me now. page 10, where it says, enough was enough. No, that's not it. Page 11, where it says David was overwhelmed. Nadara, can you read that for us?
When David was overwhelmed with holy frustration, the
Bibles, yeah.
described as a holy disconnect. In Haberel's book, Leading with the Holy Disconnected, he writes, the reason for all of this world change activity can be boiled down to one idea. People on earth are frustrated by something that's wrong in the world. God is frustrated by the same thing, and together they determined to do something about it. David was frustrated to the point of knowing something had to be done, so he willingly volunteered. It's the same disconnect, that personal frustration that will one day force us to face our fears and stop running. David knew his own frustration with Goliath and saw him differently than the rest of the Israelites. To David, things weren't always as they appeared.
Yeah. So David had this holy frustration. He said, this shouldn't be. And this is a holy angst that all of us can get when something's wrong in the world. And God also sees that it's frustrated. And David said, you shouldn't be afraid. So he did something about that crying kid.
Boy, you got a radar for that noise, don't you?
I do, yeah. My sheep know my voice, I
Gosh,
think
no
Jesus
kidding.
said. Look at page 12 for a second here. Andre Guild once said, and here's a perspective. We've got to get the right perspective on fear, because David saw Goliath differently than everybody else saw him. Let's see how David saw him that was so different. Andre Guild once said, there are few monsters who warrant the fear we have of them. And that's true. There are few monsters that warrant the fear we have of them. David looked at the giant much differently than the Israelites. Let's read what the Israelites saw. And this is a description of Goliath. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. What the Israelites saw when they looked at Goliath was, I can never defeat this person. Too big, too strong, too intimidating, and too powerful. It's the same thing that we might say with whatever our Goliath is. I'll never get beyond this. Too big, too strong, too powerful, too intimidating. It's going to cost me too much. It's going to be too hard. It's going to be too painful. I can't deal with this. And we want to run, just like they ran. But look at how David perceived Goliath. Watch this. When the Israelites saw his size, they became afraid and ran away. When David saw his size, he became confident and ran toward the giant. To David, being smaller in size meant being more agile and swift in striking down the giant. The Israelites saw all the heavy armor of the giant and felt ill-equipped to fight. David saw all the heavy armor and knew it would be difficult for the giant to escape his accuracy with a sling and a stone. Stop there for a second. Everybody else said he's got too much firepower, too much armor. David said, yeah, but I'm small and quick. And I can maneuver fast. I have an advantage here. They didn't see it that way. David did. Continuing on, to the Israelites, the bigger they are, the harder they are to conquer. To David, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. To the Israelites, the giant's words were intimidating and scary. To David, the giant's words were empty and shallow. The Israelites saw themselves running in fear day after day. David saw the Philistines running away once and for all. The Israelites were afraid of what could happen if they fought the giant and lost. David was concerned with what would happen if they didn't fight the giant. Think of that. I'm afraid if I fight the giant and I lose, this is where I'll end up. David said, I'm afraid if we don't take on that bully and we don't have victory over that giant, what it's going to continue to do to us day after day after day. I'm going to be a slave to this addiction in my life. I'm going to be a slave to this past memory that holds me in bondage. I'm going to be a slave to something I regret that I did many years ago. And if we can't face it head on, then we'll never be able to overcome. We will never be able to have victory and to defeat the Goliath so that we can move on and be what God has called us to be. David had a game-winning perspective. Somebody else read James, thanks.
David had a game-winning perspective based on the most positive outcome. Israelites had a negative perspective that invoked fear and weakness. Israelites saw the glass half empty. David saw the half full. Israelites needed these words of Luke, for nothing is impossible with God. Our perspective can comfort us, give us confidence, or it can make us afraid and cause us to run. I'm glad David chose to challenge Goliath head on.
All right, now I want you to, we're going to take just a minute here. I never know what time it is here. I feel like I'm in a casino.
10:44.
10:44. Only we have the lights on and we have windows. That's the only difference. I want you to go through a couple questions here. Talk to the people next to you. I want you to start with number 1 and work your way through, because I really want us to think about this story and the impact that it has on our lives. Because like I said, I'm pretty convinced all of us have a Goliath or two that needs to be defeated in our lives. And it causes us to be afraid. What I want us to come out with this today is I want you to take your fear out and I want you to look at it. And I want you to name it and say, you know, I have this fear, and then I want you to embrace it and say, and this fear makes me feel like this. It makes me feel like crippled and I can't go forward. It makes me feel like this. Name it, embrace it, and then let it go. Here's the problem. Oftentimes, fear will cause us to set up camp and live there instead of embracing our fear for the moment, feeling it, looking at all aspects of it, and then letting it go. It should be more like that 10-pound trout, Wes. We take it out, you weigh it, you measure it, you look at it from all sides, and then you let it go. That's the way it should be with our fear. We name it, we look at it, we embrace it, we allow ourselves to feel it, but then you know what most of us do? We don't let it go.
Take it home and eat it.
He only says that because I'm catching a release.
Yeah. There's only a few that take it home and eat it, Sherry. Not everyone.
I know it, dang it.
Just a few special ones. That's right. Here's what I want you to talk about. What do you think of Franklin Roosevelt's quote, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself"? Would you talk about that? And then a couple of the other questions, I'll just read them to you. David fought differently than Goliath expected. Instead of hand-to-hand combat, David slung a stone. What do you think about outsmarting the enemy? What do you think about outsmarting, getting a different perspective on your Goliath? Number 3, David couldn't stand God's people being ridiculed. What frustrates you about the enemy? About what the enemy is doing to God's people today? Last week at the military, we had a weekend marriage retreat called Strong Bonds Marriage Retreat. And the material is called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. So it's entertaining, it's fun, but it forces couples to talk, to engage. Javier and Patty were there. Did you like it? Did you guys get something out of it?
It was good, very good.
I have a passion about marriages because I feel like Satan is just wanting to divide and cause people to go different directions. And I feel like it's a real Goliath that we have to defeat. And its problems are alive and well in every marriage, but I'm passionate about that one. That frustrates me, and I know it frustrates God because I know God wants to see couples reflect Him and have a marriage where they work it out and a marriage that glorifies His name. And the final one is, what fear have you overcome in your life, and what fear do you still need to face? All right, take any one or several of those questions and please discuss those with the folks at your table. Thank you.